Hi guys, welcome and who dat? I'm Joe, and today we are going to be examining the final stats for our 2023 New Orleans Saints, and then we're going to determine ultimately who is the most valuable player. We're going to give out awards at the end of this video, but first we're going to bring the stats into the harsh light of reality. I've seen a lot of reactors say the stats in passing. Well, let's pull them up and look at them and see exactly how our beloved Bless You Boys in black and gold finished this 9-8 campaign, starting with quarterback Derek Carr. We're going to look at his final stats, and we're also going to look at what I had predicted they would do. This is something I examined in a past video, the midseason report after 10 games. We looked at where the players were at, and we prorated up until what we figured they would finish with, and then compared that to what I thought they would do. Back after 10 games, Derek Carr had 10 touchdowns, so he was on pace at that point for 17. That wasn't very good at all. But Derek Carr finishes 375 out of 548. That's a completion percentage of 68.4. He threw for 3,878 yards. He had 25 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. All right, well, my prediction for Carr was a completion percentage of 65%, so he exceeded what I expected from him as far as completion percentage. But as far as yards per completion, yards per attempt, way down than what I thought it would be. And of course, I expected 35 touchdowns. I thought that would be probably his best season. I figured 32 at the minimum. And he finishes with 25. Not very good, though those 8 interceptions, not bad. He was the 5th least sacked quarterback. So overall, I guess Carr had a decent season. It could have been a lot worse. All we have to do is look at the other quarterbacks between Drew Brees and Derek Carr. I think we can admit that Carr did okay, but he wasn't going to, on his own, compel this team to be a winner, a postseason juggernaut. Nope, that's not going to happen. Carr is an average quarterback. You give him a good situation around him, everybody does their job, and I think he can perform adequately. He had a few games this past season with over 70% completion, kept the interceptions to a minimum. And, so you got to give a quarterback a chance in a new system, right? He's familiar with this system, so we figured it would take off a lot sooner than it did. Overall, we want better. So hopefully this next season starts off like this past season ended. And we can continue that. And maybe we won't have so many gripes about Derek Carr, who could easily be the worst player on the team, the most disappointing player on the team, and honestly could be one of the most valuable players on the team as well. That's Derek Carr. Let's look at Alvin Kamara. He finishes with 180 carries in 14. Well, he missed the last game. I think he might have missed 4 or 5 games total. He missed the first 3. Definitely missed the last game. I think he missed another game somewhere in there, but finishes with 180 carries for 694 rushing yards. That's an average of 3.9 a carry. He had 5 rushing touchdowns. His longest carry was 17 yards. It's a pretty vanilla season for Kamara, especially with that yards per carry. I expected Kamara to average somewhere around 4.5, 4.52. I thought this was going to be a big year for him. Figured he would carry the ball a few more times, 210 carries for 951 yards and 8 touchdowns. So he didn't get in the end zone as much as I thought. He didn't average as much as I thought. And as far as receiving goes, Kamara had 75 catches on 86 targets, 466 yards, an average of 6.2 a catch, and 1 receiving touchdown. I figured he'd have 58 catches for 580 yards, 10-yard average per catch. And I figured he'd have about 4 receiving touchdowns. So I thought 12 total touchdowns, and he ends up with 6. He finishes with over 1,100 all-purpose yards, which is pretty good for your average NFL player. Over 1,100 yards, pretty good. But I expected he'd get over 1,500 all-purpose yards. So although it was a down year for Kamara, you look at the pieces that were behind him: Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. You know, we had to go grab Tony Jones Jr. for a couple of games or a game, and then it was never really a lot of depth there past Kamara. Pretty valuable, I would say. The next player we're going to look at is quarterback Taysom Hill, and we're only going to look at his rushing stats. He had 81 carries for 401 yards. It's an average of 5 yards a carry. His longest was 27. That was the longest run of the year, I think. And Taysom Hill had 4 rushing touchdowns. Also receiving 33 catches. Wow. 291 yards. 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, he was a way better receiver than I thought he would be. I only thought he'd catch about 6 balls for 54 yards and a touchdown. So he blows those numbers out of the water. But, man, rushing almost half as much as what I expected. I figured he would average 5 yards a carry. I thought he would see the end zone 6 times, 7 times total, 6 times on the ground. But yeah, it's the amount of carries that Hill had that's the disappointment here. I thought he'd have 150 carries. I hoped he would finish the year with at least 100. But no, we have an offensive coordinator, that didn't know how to utilize Hill, didn't play him whenever he could have. You know, even when you're down a score or 2, you still use Taysom Hill. He's one of your best weapons, obviously, at 5 yards a carry for this team that's struggled to run the ball. So, yeah, the midway point of this season, after about 10 games, I thought Taysom Hill was our most valuable player, and if utilized correctly, he still would be. Let's take a look at the receivers. We're going to start with Chris Olave. He finishes with 87 catches for 1,123 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. He was targeted 138 times and caught 87. Now, that's an average I don't care for. He averaged 12.9 a catch. And when it's all said and done, these are really solid numbers, especially for a guy that is only in his second year. Olave's a spectacular player. He did a lot. When Michael Thomas got injured, I didn't think Olave was quite ready to be that number 1 guy, and he showed that he could be, even though we had some struggles there with him early. I figured he would finish with 70 catches for 1,120 yards and 5 touchdowns. So I got the yards and the touchdowns spot on. But I figured he would average a hell of a lot more per catch. Let's pull up Rasheed Shahid. And he surprised me. I figured he would average about 18 yards a catch. He averages 15.6. It's still a phenomenal number. But he caught 46 balls on 75 targets for 719 yards. That yards per catch is great at 15.6. I figured he'd have 34 catches for 630 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he doesn't average quite as much as I thought he would, but he caught a heck of a lot more balls, and he saw the end zone more than I thought. Rasheed Shahid had a few yards running the ball as well. But I'm also going to throw in that he averaged 21.3 on kick returns, and on punt returns, he averaged 13.6. Those are Pro Bowl numbers, and he is in the Pro Bowl. Rasheed finishes with over 1,400 all-purpose yards. That leads the team. And Rasheed Shahid is a great player, could possibly be our most valuable player. Let's take a look at Michael Thomas. He only plays 10 games. I think 9.5, something like that. I figured he would finish with 60 catches for 840 yards and 7 touchdowns. Boy, was I off on those touchdowns. He only had 1 for the year, not 7. He finishes with 39 catches for 448 yards, 11.5 a catch. It's right around where I thought he'd average, about 13, 14 yards. He averages 11.5, but Thomas wasn't utilized properly. I think that he's the kind of guy that demands the ball. You have to feed him quite a bit to get him going, and you have to run certain routes for him to be productive. None of that happened. And still, when he was playing, he was pretty consistent and showed that he can still play in this league. So overall, I'm not too disappointed in Michael Thomas. He just, he stayed on the field 10 games. You figured if you could get him for half the season, that's pretty good. I figured 10 games, 12 games. So let's take a look at tight end Juwan Johnson. Here's a disappointment. I figured he'd have 50 catches, 650 yards, 7 touchdowns. He finishes with 37 catches, 368 yards, 4 touchdowns. He only had 1 touchdown through the majority of the season. Finishes the year strong. He was targeted 59 times, had 37 catches. That should be a little higher. Too many drops. Quarterback seemed to be, off target. We weren't utilizing Juwan. We weren't running the ball good. He had to block for half a season. All kinds of excuses. But the end result is nice to see he had 4 touchdowns, but overall pretty unspectacular season. All right. I'll also mention A.T. Perry here real quick. He had 12 catches for 246 yards. That's an average of 20.5 a catch. That led the team. Yards per catch. Only 12 catches, and he was featured pretty heavily in 7 games. So 4 of those 12 catches went for touchdowns. He was targeted 18 times, had 12 catches. So overall, I would say A.T. Perry looks like a kind of guy that is on the way up, but it's not quite there yet. I can't go in the next year thinking A.T. Perry's our number 1 or X receiver. No. A lot of potential there, and boy, if he can turn a corner, I tell you, it'd be a nice piece, and we'd have ourselves 3 nice young receivers here. So that's your offensive players and the stats, what I thought they would do, what they actually did, and now we're going to pull up the defensive stats, and we're just going to fly through this real quick. And you're talking about some eye-popping numbers here. Demario Davis leads the team with total tackles, 121. He should have gone to the Pro Bowl, but he doesn't. 6.5 sacks, 12 tackles for losses, 4 passes defensed. He forced 1 fumble and he recovered 1 fumble and almost took it to the house. He wanted to. Yeah, Davis, Pro Bowl numbers all the way around and quite possibly the most valuable player on the team. Pete Werner finishes second on the team with 93 total tackles. He had a half a sack, 4 tackles for losses, 1 pass defense, 1 interception, 2 fumble recoveries. Werner had a bit of a letdown season here for me. I thought he would break 100 tackles and Davis wouldn't have quite as many. Werner was never good at going after the quarterback. And he seemed to take some weird angles and was out of position. Probably had a lot to do with us insisting on him being out there covering wide receivers and stuff like that. But overall, Werner's a good player. These are decent numbers. But I thought Werner was a Pro Bowl type. So Carl Granderson, he could have seen the Pro Bowl this year. He finishes leading the defensive line in total tackles with 78. Leads the defense in sacks with 8.5. And leads the defense in tackles for loss with 14. He also had a pass defense, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Carl Granderson, undrafted guy, gets a good extension this year. We're going to keep him. We finally have a defensive end we can count on, as Cameron Jordan is getting too old to play. And we have Carl Granderson, a guy who's playing at right about a Pro Bowl level and pretty much out of his head. Good job, Granderson, this year. Paulson Adebo, cornerback, was leaned on heavily. Expected to be a starter. We didn't expect him to take Marshawn Lattimore's place for 7 games. But Adebo steps up and does fantastic. The amount of penalties he had this year was minuscule compared to what I expected. I expected 1 pass interference call per game. I think he only had 6 or 7 for the year. Finishes with 76 total tackles, 18 passes defensed, which led the team and was among the league best. He also led the team in interceptions with 4. He had 2 forced fumbles and 2 fumble recoveries. Paulson Adebo played at an MVP level for this team this year, and he was relied on heavily and came through. Great job, Paulson Adebo. We made the right choice starting you. Now, Alontae Taylor bounced around quite a bit, played the nickel mostly, had to go on the outside for a few games. And I think Taylor's numbers are out of this world. 75 total tackles. He had a sack. He had 6 tackles for losses, 14 passes defensed, which was among the league best, 2 interceptions, and a forced fumble. Now, we know Taylor got burnt a few games and had to be benched a couple of times because, the situation, the way the game was unfolding, he was out of his league a couple of times. But I think playing that nickelback, that was pretty tough for him. But still, these numbers are pretty impressive. Not bad for a guy that was being jerked around all over the field. I think if we get ourselves a good nickelback and we let Alontae play on the outside, we go ahead and trade Lattimore, and I think we'll be fine. Re-sign Isaac Yiadom, and I think Taylor's a great player in this league. Those 14 passes defense, man, that is great. Tyrann Mathieu, 75 total tackles, 9 passes defensed, tied for the team league in interceptions with 4, And he had the only defensive touchdown for our team. Overall, very solid numbers from the old man, the Grandpa Honey Badger. Good job, Matthew. Colin Saunders, 57 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 pass defense. Yeah, okay. Marshawn Lattimore missed 7 games, but when he played, he had pretty good numbers. He's an excellent tackler. 48 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 8 passes defensed in 10 games, and 1 interception. Good job by Lattimore, and if he'd have stayed healthy, maybe he'd have made the Pro Bowl. Cameron Jordan, 43 total tackles, 2 sacks, his worst season since his rookie campaign. 3 tackles for losses, 3 passes defensed, 1 fumble recovery. Cam Jordan had to, at the end there, he had to get off the field on passing downs. And Dennis Allen said that Jordan is, probably going to be a rundown guy only from now on. Paying him a lot of money with that contract extension for him to only be playing 2 downs here and there. So I noticed a big letdown. He started the year pretty average, and then it just got worse. The ankle injury and everything else. So defensive end is a high priority in the draft this year or in free agency, depending on what we can do. Rookie safety Jordan Howden, 43 total tackles, 1 sack, 5 passes defensed, 1 forced fumble. He played safety quite a bit for the team, forced in the roles. We had a lot of veteran depth, and so sometimes he was on the bench for those veterans, but sometimes he played. Sometimes he earned the job over those veterans. And overall, I think the rookie had an excellent season. Malcolm Roach, he got hurt at the end of the year, but he played sparingly when he played. But, he had a few downs and responded with 38 total tackles, 3 tackles for losses, and 3 passes defensed. Roach is a good plug-and-play player. No sacks this year. But I like Malcolm Roach. I hope we keep him around. Safety Marcus May missed a lot of time and was out of position on a lot of plays, but he's a decent tackler. He misses some, but finishes the year 37 total tackles, 1 sack, 3 tackles for losses, 2 passes defensed, and 2 interceptions. Cornerback Isaac Yiadom has to start, has to play quite a bit. We thought he was going to be a special teams gunner ace, which he is. But, man, the guy can play quarterback. 37 total tackles, 14 passes defensed, which was second on the team, tied with Taylor. And, once again, among the league best. He had 1 interception. He had 1 fumble recovery. I think that's a guy we need to keep around. Yeah, I like Isaac Yiadom quite a bit. Zach Bond plays linebacker. He's always out of position, can't cover. We finally put him on the defensive end this year. Way more than we ever have. And he responded pretty well. 30 total tackles, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for losses, 2 passes defensed when he was in coverage, an interception when he was in coverage, and then a fumble right after he's running the ball back and fumbles it. Oh, well, what do you expect from a defensive end playing out of position at linebacker? Overall, not so bad. Do we keep on around to be that third down pass rusher? That's what we got Isaiah Foskey for. Zach Bond, I can't see us paying him any more than $3 million a year, $4 million, because he is a good veteran. He is a great special teamer, and he has the versatility to play a linebacker. But I think if we re-sign him, we're going to have to take Cameron Jordan off the field on third down and put Zach Bond at defensive end. That's if we don't address it any other way. Also, we have to see what's going to happen with, what's his name, the defensive end, Peyton Turner. I think we have Turner one more year. Maybe he's the guy that comes in on third down and turns it up for us. Jonathan Abram had to get a couple of starts, pulled him up from the practice squad to the limit, to the max, to where we couldn't do it anymore. Then we had to put him on the active roster. And he responds with 26 total tackles, 1 tackle for a loss, 1 pass defense, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble. He had a lot of that in just one of his starts. Overall, a good tackler and pretty good safety. Good depth to have, former first-round draft pick. I wouldn't want to go a whole season with him as our starter, but he responded well. Lonnie Johnson was another veteran that we had that would have probably been in that spot ahead of Abrams had Lonnie Johnson not gotten injured. I'll also mention our rookie defensive tackle, Brian Bresee, 24 tackles. He played in all 17 games, was injury-free. It's a great thing to see. 4.5 sacks, and from the defensive interior, I didn't expect him to get much more than 3.5. So it kind of surprised me there. 7 tackles for losses and 6 passes defense, which is a big surprise. That guy can get his paws up when he doesn't get there and knock the ball down. Is he Rookie of the Year? Very well could be. And I'll also mention K-Pass, Tano Passanio, 19 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and 2 passes defense. K-Pass is a backup who comes in to spot for Cameron Jordan, and he plays defensive tackle sometimes. He got a lot more defensive tackle looks when Roach went out. He finishes with 3.5 sacks. You know, between K-Pass and Bresee, you got 8 sacks. That's pretty good. That's your defensive stats right there. Those were all the stats. I'll mention Blake Grupe before we give the awards away. Blake Grupe finishes 30 out of 37. That's 81.1%. I say if you're going to be a field goal kicker in this league, you have to be better than 80%. He finishes at 81.1. That's okay. His long was a 55-yarder. The big problem was missing 2 inside of 30 yards. He was 10 of 12 inside of 30 and misses 2 of them. But last year, was it Will Lutz? Last year, Will Lutz missed 7 kicks. We thought he had a pretty, mediocre year. And then now this is our rookie's first year, and he misses 7 kicks. If he'd have made those 2 short misses, we would feel really good about this kicker. So I'm okay with Grupe. Rookie bumps and bruises. Our punter ended up with among the league in punts inside the 20, though his average per punt was horrible, and the net wasn't great. The net was great compared to the length of the punt. The coverage team did great. Like I said, a lot of them were inside the 20, so I guess we're going to keep going with the punter. All right, let's give out those awards. And first, we're going to start with the Rookie of the Year. And our nominees are safety Jordan Howden, defensive tackle Brian Bresee, wide receiver A.T. Perry, running back Kendre Miller, defensive end Isaiah Foskey. Foskey ain't going to win this one. Miller was hurt too much. A.T. Perry did incredible. Brian Bresee was a constant the entire season, as was safety Jordan Howden. And I'm going to go ahead and give the award for Best Rookie of the Year to safety Jordan Howden. A very good season for Howden. I feel it was impressive to see a 5th-round draft pick go out there and be productive, to start ahead of veterans And even though he struggled at times, he kept himself on the field because he had to. And, yeah, he responded pretty well. It was tough. I almost made it a tie. 4.5 sacks by Rasheed is pretty impressive. 6 passes defense, pretty impressive. But, Rasheed was a rotational player. He came in a lot. But Nathan Shepard was the starter. And Howden managed to get on the field as a starter quite a bit. And 5th-round pick, you expect a lot more from your first rounder. So that's my justification here. Rookie of the year, safety Jordan Howden. All right, the most disappointing player of the year. That would be the entire team, right? No, but my nominees are quarterback Derek Carr, safety Marcus May, running back Jamal Williams, left tackle Trevor Penning, and defensive end Cam Jordan. All of these guys were very disappointing indeed, but nobody can get the award ahead of left tackle Trevor Penning, right? I know a lot of you want to give it to Carr. Pretty tempted to give it to Williams and Jordan. But definitely Trevor Penning. Ends up on the bench, ends up healthy, can't even get in the game as a sixth tackle, can't get in the game as a starter when all of the players were getting hurt. We were pulling people off the street to play tackle, and this first-round draft pick sitting on the bench. I sure hope he gets his head out of his ass and he turns into something. At least play like a 3rd rounder, 4th rounder. At least be our 6th offensive lineman. Can you, Penning? I don't know. Not holding my breath. The next category is most surprising player, and this is a surprise in a good way. And my nominees are defensive end Carl Granderson, who I did expect something from, safety Jordan Howden, cornerback Isaac Yiadom, wide receiver A.T. Perry, and left tackle Andres Pete, who slides over from guard to play tackle for the first time in years. And we end up getting the offensive line right for a little while anyway. It looked okay. It looked better than at first. And I did not expect Pete to be that piece. But of all the surprising players in this year, I got to give the award to cornerback Isaac Yiadom. Exceptional year with 14 passes defensed. Played out of his mind. The entire secondary was exposed during the Rams game, and I don't fault Yiadom for that. You want to look at competition and who he had to go up against. He had some pretty good wide receivers to go up against. Whether the teams may have been struggling or not, that's what you got to see. I think he played himself into a decent free agent contract this year. So if the Saints want to keep him, it might cost them a little more than they're willing to pay for a 4th quarterback. But he had to step up as a number 2 this season. And overall, he did very, very, very well. So most surprising player, cornerback Isaac Yiadom. I hope we re-sign him. I hope we trade Lattimore, get a 1st rounder and a 3rd rounder, and go out there, and Yiadom can be our immediate backup. He can be a plug-and-play starter on the outside and be our gunner. And let's see what we can do with Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor and add Isaac Yiadom. We're going to need a nickel back. So Ugo Amadi might have to re-sign that guy again, too. All right, defensive player of the year. Our nominees are cornerback Alontae Taylor, defensive end Carl Granderson, safety Tyrann Mathieu, cornerback Paulson Adebo, linebacker Demario Davis. I know Alontae's a surprise guy here. Hey, we got rid of Bradley Roby. We needed someone to play nickel. The guy can bounce on the outside and do it too. He finishes with 14 passes defense. Alontae Taylor, 6 tackles for losses. I mean, second-year guy, probably a sophomore slump, trying to learn a whole new position. Yeah, I'm going to give Taylor credit where it is due. Tyrann Mathieu had a solid season, never missed a game, was played pretty much every down. Never had to worry about that position with Mathieu out there. Carl Granderson playing out of his head. But it really comes down to Paulson Adebo and Demario Davis, and this should be a tie. But I'm going to give the edge to cornerback Paulson Adebo, who proved he was a starting cornerback in training camp, beat out Taylor for that starting role, and then had to step up after the All-Pro Marshawn Lattimore gets hurt, and Paulson Adebo responds with an excellent season. Should have gone to the Pro Bowl as a cornerback. And that's my player, defensive player of the year, Demario Davis, right there. 1A, 1B. Carl Granderson, if you want to go with him, I can understand why. Offensive player of the year, our nominees are quarterback Derek Carr, quarterback Taysom Hill, wide receiver Chris Olave, wide receiver Rasheed Shahid, and running back Alvin Kamara. And this was a tough one for me. If utilized correctly, I think Taysom Hill is such a good player, a very valuable player on offense. No one else can do what he does. And in that respect, he's the most valuable player. But it came down to Kamara and Olave. Olave played great this year, but I'm going to give it to Alvin Kamara. Olave had some decent pieces around him. Kamara, not so much, with Kendre Miller being hurt all the time, Jamal Williams being hurt a lot, and being ineffective a lot. Even though Alvin had a down year, I think Alvin is our most valuable player on offense, and he is the offensive player of the year. Shahid had more all-purpose yards, granted, but I'm giving the edge here to Kamara. Over 1,100 all-purpose yards, 7 total touchdowns, 6 total touchdowns. Alvin Kamara, offensive player of the year, and now the moment we've all been waiting for, the most valuable player on a 9-8 football team. Our nominees are running back Alvin Kamara, wide receiver Chris Olave, linebacker Demario Davis, cornerback Paulson Adebo, defensive end Carl Granderson. Those are, without a doubt, your 5 best players on this team. They all produced quite well this year. And I'm going to give the MVP to running back Alvin Kamara. The first 3 games, we went 2-1 without Alvin. It was pretty good, but we had to do some patchwork there. Kendre wasn't hurt the entire 3 games. We ended up having to get Tony Jones Jr. to come in. But once Alvin came back, it felt pretty good. As a matter of fact, Williams and Miller had their issues, and so without Kamara, there wasn't much going on at all at running back. There were games when we utilized Kamara in the wrong way, and I blame the coaching staff for that. And I'm pretty sure we all feel if Alvin Kamara was on a better team, he'd be putting up as good a numbers as he is capable of and has reached in his career. I don't know if he'll ever do what he was able to do 4 years ago, but I still think he's got some left in the tank. And I still think if utilized properly, he is a solid running back. And he is my pick for most valuable player of the year. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to Rosenfield 10. For more videos like this, I'm Joe. Stay tuned for more Saints videos. And until then, I'll talk to you later. Who dat?